I'm not responsible for somebody else. They are, but I'm responsible for me in my relationship with somebody else. And I don't want to do anything in that relationship which would obviously be off-putting or present God in a negative way. But that doesn't mean that people wouldn't be upset with me or accuse me of various things because I'm not perfect, you know, but I would not ever intend to do anything that would bring any dishonor to God, because I want God to be honored. And, you know, that means living my life in a relationship with him, hopefully to bring honor to him in that way.
I saw a video of yours this morning and yesterday, just a little bit, creating and engaging. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I thought you were talking about creation. It was a short series, but there was a lot in there. I don't know if God's giving you more to share on this, but if
Um, so what was the subject?
creating and engaging, I believe it was creating and engaging beings. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, um, that's not something that I would have ever even thought about doing. But I was engaging with a group of beings called the Guardians, and they guard different constellations and aspects of creation. And um, they showed me that there were some areas of constellations that were unguarded, and that there needed to be more guardians. So I was like, okay, I didn't resonate with me to go and make a guardian or do anything like that. Um, but they said we need more guardians. Can you make more guardians? I'm like, oh, okay. I need to check that one out. So I went to the father and checked it out, and he said, well, why wouldn't you? Um, and I said, well, why didn't you? It's almost like, well, if there needs to be more, why are there some missing? It's us, and his response was quite interesting because he said, well, we left quite a lot of things undone for you to complete. So I thought, okay. So yeah, God wants us to participate in creation, and we're made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, he is creative, and we are made in that image to be creative. I just never considered it in a way of creating some sort of sentient being. But what God was intimating was, well, it's no different than creating anything else. You call something into being. You've done things before, like releasing blue lights, and those happened and things happened. So it's like, okay. So that's not really any more complicated than anything else. So long as I know it's the Father's heart, and very clearly he was saying it was, therefore, like anything else, the process that I would go through would be I brood, so I engage the Father's heart to come into agreement and alignment with his heart. I then become his voice, so I can call things into being that are aligned to his heart. Light responds to me and to that voice and begins to form that reality. Um, so that was it. So I thought, okay. Um, so I went back to this council chamber, um, and I said, okay, yeah, I have permission to do that. Now, I probably should have asked, well, how many do you want? And, but I didn't really. I just thought, okay, I choose to create um, some guardians. And as I said the words, that intention manifested instantly because I'm in that realm of heaven. It doesn't always manifest instantly on earth because you've got to get on earth as in heaven. So sometimes we try and do things on earth without having done them in heaven first, and that creates a disconnect. But as I was in a council of guardians, therefore I was able to see these beings created. Now they were there and I'd done what I needed to do. It was their responsibility to go and assign them out into constellations and do whatever their job was there. So I didn't really think much more about it. Now, I had created some other things in the past, which were forerunner experiences that God took me into that I, again, didn't really consider. But it was like, okay, if you're going to be like me, if you're going to be a son of God, then you need to understand creation. So, that was sort of part of how do you birth something from your innermost being? I don't know. It was I don't know how to do it. Wasn't at that point. It wasn't like, oh, I know how to create something. But I agreed with God and let that creative process bring something to birth. But now I know what that process is. See, quite a lot of things I've done without knowing how they were done. I just did them because God said something and I did it. But then he would often show me how. So now I know the process of creating. So I can do that whenever I need to do it. But most of the time I don't need to. So it's not a question of, I go around creating things all the time. But in creating something huge, it's no different than creating something small. Only in our mind is something bigger, more difficult. So, the first time I ever created something, I was with the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit took me out to the edge of the universe. And I'm sort of like really like, whoa, this is somewhat overwhelming. And then the spirit sort of guided me and caused that creative act to take place. So I birthed something. He set the desire in me. I was pregnant with it, and this all happened in an instant, and then I birthed it. So out of my innermost being came a galaxy. And the galaxy, galaxies are different shape. They look different. They have different things. We have a Milky Way. There are other, and out of this galaxy, it was created and formed like a infinity sign, the covenant sign. And I was like, whoa, we're talking back in 2010. So this is a long time ago. And this is even when in infancy of my understanding anything. But it happened. And I didn't really think much more of it. And then later on, the father reminded me of this galaxy and said, you are responsible for it. You created it. You're responsible for it. I'm like, I didn't sign up for that. You know, I didn't sign up for it. And so I was, well, in what way I'm responsible for it? Okay, well, what's in it? What is in this galaxy that you've created in this form? So then that caused me to think, okay, responsibility is a bit more than just having fun, doing creative acts and doing things. So it was like, okay, if I'm responsible for what I'm done, what am I supposed to do now with that? So I can leave that whole galaxy in a state of flux, if you like, until I feel ready to do something about it. And that might be a long, long time from now. Who knows? But it did cause me to think about creativity and what would I, if God said, here's a galaxy, what's going to be in it? What would I like in it? Now, simply, I could say all the planets are inanimate. There's nothing, no life on them. Simple. I've got no more responsibility than that. Or I could think there's lots of planets within this galaxy, probably billions. What's going to be on them? Is it going to be vegetation? Is there going to be actual life? Is what's there? What is going to be there? What would I have to be there? And then what responsibility would I have towards it once it is there? Which is why there is nothing there yet. Because I'm sort of like, do I really want that level of responsibility to ensure something is operating the way it should? You know, yeah, and it's a big thing, you know, and I didn't really anticipate that, but I did then start to think about what would a planet look like that I wanted to furnish with something. You know, would it be like Avatar, Pandora, and mountains or amazing seas and creatures and living connections with everything? Would that be the sort of place I'd want to create? Or would I want something completely different from that? So it made me think, and I'm still thinking, not such that I want to go and do anything about it right now, but I am still thinking about it.
So we can create, and of course with an intention, God intention. So there's a
Mm,
lot involved in that. So we need to understand creation. We need to, as the Lord teaches us, sonship.
mm,
There's so much more. There's so much to what you've experienced that we haven't. Since you have ascended, I haven't. Um, I don't understand tangibly, physically what you've experienced, but based on what you've been saying,
mm,
I feel it and I experience it with you. We do. And it's so strange that everything that you're saying that we so much resonate with, and we haven't been there yet. So I guess my next question would be, how about the planets that we do know of?
mm.
Do you believe that they were inhabited at one time? Or do you believe that God is uh, perhaps raising this up through maturity to for them to be inhabited? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
I mean, we are looking from a perspective of things having gone wrong, if you like. I mean, not being God's original intention. I believe God's original intention would be that what we do here on this planet would expand into other planets. And therefore, we would therefore colonize them in a way that reflected God's kingdom. What we would do right now is probably stick a flag on it with either China, Russia, US, or whatever on it, and own it and strip it and use it for ourselves because we're still not operating in any sense of covenant or peace or relationship. It is all divisive and not something I would want to export out to anywhere else, even though other dimensions have been negatively affected by us here, and we still have to see a lot of that restored and repaired, which does have a direct connection to us. So I believe if Adam and Eve had continued to produce children and they continue to produce children, that cultivated environment of tending and looking after the planet would have meant this planet would have been in a perfect state, but we would have outgrown it in a sense that there would be more people than the planet can sustain in a way which is legitimate. So therefore, what would we do next? Well, the solar system is designed to be in balance and harmony, and there are other moons and things within the solar system that are potentially habitable or would have been that we are designed to connect to. Then there's beyond that. And if we had not chosen our own way and therefore have to come up with man-made solutions to be able to engage these planets, like producing spaceships and things with propulsion systems, if we had been able to mature and ascend and be able to access the gateways within the universe that God had established, and there is a connection of wormholes, for a better name between planets and other galaxies and all sorts of things that were designed for connection, which we would be able to use. I still believe we can use them appropriately in the future, and I've certainly seen them, and I've accessed some of the gateways to them. But we're not in a state yet of having the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. Therefore, there's a lot of restoration that needs to take place to restore us to our position of sonship, to restore the planet into its rightful state, and then to come together in one heart and one mind and one purpose to then expand that beyond the planet, taking peace where we go, not war, not, conflict. And certainly the reason for going would be to expand that concept of intimacy with God in a garden environment of beauty. Now, there's looking back and saying, well, what would it be like? What we've got to say is, what is it going to be like when we get into alignment with God's heart and we bring that about? So this is where some blue sky thinking and some willingness to be creative and not restricted by what we know needs to come in. And God was talking about establishing embassies of heaven on earth and sort of recolonizing this planet for God's kingdom and infiltrating the whole of the planet with love, and so that this world would come back into a restored state and every person would enter into sonship, and therefore there would be no opposition, no conflict, just peace, family as God originally intended, one family, all working together in relationship with one another, outworking God's heart and purpose. Now, you look at the world right now, and that looks like an impossibility, but it isn't. Nothing's impossible with God. And I believe as more and more people get to know who they are, get to know who God is in reality, then we'll start to bring more and more godly influence and things will change. When we get to that point, then there will be not just going back to what it was, but going back to what it will be, going to what it will be from where we are right now. So what will that look like? Well, what we want it to, and so, we were thinking of restoration cities and having people live together and dwell together and function together as sons of God in community and fellowship and all that stuff. What would that look like? Well, okay, well, what would we do right now if 100,000 people said, well, we want to live together in harmony and together in God's, what would it look like? Well, where would we put 100,000 people to start with? Do we have the land for 100,000 people? Okay, if we don't have the land, where would we put them? Okay, well, could we go up in the air and have floating cities in the air? Who knows? And would we make them or would we create them? And I think this is going back to the creative question. We have this ability to create without using resources and inappropriately using the resources that were intended for blessing and killing them to make something. Therefore we need housing for 100,000 people. Well, let's create it and not build it. How long is it going to take to build houses for 100,000 people? Where are we going to get the bricks, mortar, everything else needed? Well, why are we even thinking that way? We're creative sons of God. We just call it into being and create it. Well, what's it going to look like? Whatever we like. Whatever we're creatively desiring it to look like. and it may be very, very different from what we're used to now. So I don't necessarily believe that if Adam and Eve had not had sort of not gone the way they did and they carried on ascending, that they would still be living in a garden. Because although God has gardens in heaven, he also has other things which seemingly are constructed or created, thrones and things like that. So we may, in this process of ascension, the creative identity that we have in God would have inspired us to make things. So I do believe we may have been living in things that we would have created. Whether we would call them cities or what we would call them, I don't know. But the infrastructure within those would have been completely harmonious and operating out of discoveries that are not yet released into the earth that would have been released had Adam and Eve had not decided to do it themselves. So I believe there is energy and other technologies that would have enabled us to increase things, offline grid energy, 0 point energy, whatever that we wouldn't need to do things the way we've done them, which have generally caused pollution and ruined the planet. So there would have been no oil or gas if there was nothing dead. Oil and gas are the result of dead things. Coal is the result of dead things. If there is no death, then you would have no oil or gas. So we're living off death. It sounds a bit gruesome, but actually we are. All of our power, or a lot of it, comes out of death. And that system is a corrupt system to which the energy companies that are profited from death want to keep control of those systems for their selfish ends. And therefore, if there was technology to be able to harness quantum energy, 0 point energy, we don't want it in the hands of people who would make people pay for it. It should be free and abundant and overflowing, that gives us the creative ability to continue with that creation. So a lot of things have to change. If there is going to be a release of technology or knowledge, let's make sure it gets to the right people who are not going to abuse it and are not going to bring death out of it. Because a lot of discoveries end up being used inappropriately for the wrong things. So there's a lot of change that obviously needs to take place. But we're definitely creative and should begin to start using our imagination now to figure out what the future is going to look like, not based on what we already know. So what is built into creation that gives us clues of creative things? The golden mean or the golden ratio, Fibonacci number sequences, things that are numerical, mathematical things built into the fabric of creation, which can be harnessed to create with a beauty that's aligned to the heart of God. And, you know, you look at things like the spiral shells of snails and all these things which are shaped after the golden mean and everything else. If you're a woodworker and you build a box, you make the box in a ratio that makes it pleasing and looks right. So if I was going to make a box, it would be in the ratio of 8-5-3. 8 long, 5 wide, and 3 high. That's the sort of perfect ratio that gives a sort of creative perspective to things. So there are things already there for us to learn from how God did it. What do things look like that God created? You know, and that's both on earth, but also in the realms of heaven as well. Of interesting things when you start thinking about how to create and what to create and, you know, all of that type of thing. but we do have the ability, um, but we shouldn't be playing with it. It's not something to be, it's not a toy, and it's not a kindergarten thing. It's a thing for mature sons of God to administrate. Well, the ratio thing is just the golden mean, which is sort of you can Google it. You'll see that there are certain sequences of numbers that things are created with naturally, and it's not exactly 853, but 853 is an approximation that makes things look a particular way. But there's lots more, you know. Yeah, the golden ratio is 61.8%. So there's a lot of things that when you look into nature, you see that in how God has created things. And some people, I mean, there's a lot in numerology and things. I mean, Tesla said if you understand nines, threes, sixes, you're going to understand how things work. So there's sort of a revelation of the perfection of mathematics that God, as the creator, has imparted into creation, and there is a logic to it. And I'm not a mathematician, far from it. But when I look at something, and the human face, and the symmetry of where our eyes are, all that is part of the same symmetry that you find within those number sequences. And if you sort of, there are things with prime numbers, and there are things with, in mathematics, which there's beauty in it. And mathematicians who are, they see it, whereas, I've learned about it. um but if you sort of look at um golden ratio in nature, you will find all sorts of different pictures and images, that are very, very interesting. Within flowers, you have the things like the flower of life, the seed of life. You have the whole thing of like sacred geometry and the cube, Metatron's cube. You have the Merkaba. All these sort of things. You have the fern, which is made up of fronds, which are made up of fronds, and you have this sort of picture of um, different forms, and you see it all there within shells and all sorts of different things. There's just beauty in it, and there's such creative beauty within flowers and petals, and every snowflake, is every one is unique, and formed out of a mathematical sequence, you know. Yeah, and you look up and see those things, the flower of life and things like that. Yeah, I remember, I like doodling when I'm sort of, not really, when it helps me concentrate to doodle, and I doodle. I would always find that there would be two forms of doodle. There would be the golden ratio type doodles that I would do, and then there would be sort of geometric shapes that I would draw. I didn't think about it. I never even realized until I would look down and see all my doodles and see that they were sort of made up of these things. And I think there's something that we all have inbuilt in us that connects to creation in this sort of creative way. Um, and you sort of get that within some paintings like that. I think the Mona Lisa, when you look at the whole shape and all of that, there's a lot there. I'm not an expert on it, but I am aware of it, and I think there's something to be there to learn from. Why did God do that? What is it within that is connected to God's heart, you know, because he wouldn't have created it that way unless there was some connection to him, in itself. But yeah, it is a beautiful thing when you see it because it pleasing to the eye. You know what I mean? There's pleasure in it. There's a beauty in it. Um, but we'll see, you know, what happens when we begin to release our creativity, um, you know, in many different ways, I guess, going forward. So, yeah. Yeah, I like that. The belly button height is 61.8% of your total height. Yeah. Yeah, even in those sort of seemingly things, you know, you've got the shape with sort of the curl 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. You know, there are these sort of number sequences within it, which are to mathematicians beautiful. Yeah, for most people, they're just numbers. But actually, they're not just numbers because they are what is built into these geometric and natural shapes.
Again, happy St. Patrick's Day. And St. Patrick is a patron saint of Ireland.
Mm,
Evidently, what's is interesting is I was reading up on Patrick. I just feel like he kind of represented some of that supernatural aspect or connection to the spirit realm and Father God to do things that would seem not normal or not human
mm,
necessarily. A couple things that he's attributed to is he cleared all of Ireland of snakes, right? And so, in the same way that we're talking about having creation, having our land, looking like the kingdom with love, joy, and peace, he came in and cleared out some of the maybe perhaps discord. It might be symbolic, might have been actual snakes that were cleared out, but
mm.
to set the stage for righteousness in the land, or kind of right standing or goodness in the land, right? But anyway, just wanted to get your perspective of sons operating more in the realm of the supernatural, in the realm of pulling from the spirit realm into the physical realm, God's heart, and seeing that outworked in creation. So that, because we do know that for the increase of his government and
Mm.
kingdom and peace, there will be no end, that we align with his heart and see the kingdom increase, especially with all the darkness and all the discord and division, we want to bring forth, out of darkness into light, which is our mandate as sons.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Patrick was actually English, you know, so he was enslaved in Ireland, and I think he went back to Ireland to bring freedom. But I think he was originally English. So all those Irish out there who are celebrating St. Patrick's Day, you're celebrating an English person,
Yeah, he
really.
was British, right? And they put
Yeah,
him into slavery when he was 16,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then you're right.
yeah. So, but yes, it does give a picture of what is possible when someone embraces their true identity and starts to outwork their true identity. You know, his identity was not slave, but son. And therefore he operated in a level of sonship, um, which back in the 5th century, I think it was, um, seemingly had a powerful effect on Ireland, on Ireland, and still does in a sense because they're still celebrating it. You know, so you can think how many other people who lived 1500 years ago or more are still celebrated today in that way. Now, I know the celebrations tend to be a bit wild if you're into your Guinness and stuff. Um, but there's still something there that most people in Ireland would have no idea what Patrick actually did. It is just an excuse for a bit of a booze up. But actually, he did do an amazing things. There are attributed raisings from the dead that he accomplished, and various other things that he was able to do. Um, I think ultimately, yeah, we're all called to be administrating on earth as it is in heaven. therefore outworking that heavenly things. Now, the Celtic saints very much were more connected to creation. Augustine certainly tried to cause them to come back, to all come back under a religious, system, whereas they sort of mostly fled out to the islands of the UK and sort of did their own thing out there. And you've got other islands in the UK that have history of Celtic saints operating there. So they still have a deposit in the land of that sort of Celtic relational Christianity, not the Augustinian Catholic version that he was imposing on everybody, to which a lot of them refused to have imposed on, and they fled out to the district parts and did some things out there, But all of us, I think, have that ability to be able to be seated in heavenly places and administrating the kingdom through our lives and around our lives, that we therefore are a demonstration of heaven on earth. And I think that would function in many different ways. The way we live, our attitude, the way we love, the way we forgive, the way we demonstrate who God is through how we are with other people in relationship, as well as what you could say the miraculous, which could have the abilities that Jesus did. Jesus did say, you can do all things that I do and, greater. So what does that mean? Well, he did a lot of sort of engaging creation type miracles, multiplying things, walking on water, disappearing, walking through people. He knew how to engage creation because he was the creator ultimately, and creation responded to him. But he was also the pattern of the Son of Man as a son of God that we are. Therefore, we should not be intimidated by what he did or what is possible for us to do. But again, in alignment with the heart of God, Jesus did nothing that he didn't see the Father doing. So he always did what he saw the Father doing. So how do we see what the Father doing is the key, and that really is what boils down to, do we know the Father's heart? Are we connected to the Father's heart? Are we outworking the Father's heart through our lives every day? Not just in what is seen as what we call miraculous, but in everyday life, so that people see the light that we should be, the light of the world. That's what Jesus said we should be, because he left here, asked us here to do that. And where he was the light of the world, he's now called us to be the light of the world. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot for us to discover, of who we really are, but also who God really is, so we can be a full reflection of him on the earth. And it can only be by relationship. So we're going to do things the way God does them. I mean, if you look through church history, the church has done some pretty terrible things in the name of God. The Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, Christendom, forcing people to accept Christianity by the sword or the gun. I mean, crazy things when you look at what Jesus did and how he came to promote peace. But all of those people think they're doing it for God. So we've got to be very careful not to make assumptions about what God wants us to do and how he wants us to do it, but to make sure we are actually in alignment with his heart and that we resonate with it, and we're only going to outwork his heart. Yes, creatively through who we are, but always aligned to his heart, never independent. So the relationship is the key, engaging the heart of the Father, knowing the heart of the Father, and being a vessel for the Father's heart to be outworked on earth. But also that we're seated in heavenly places to establish what the Father's heart is there to outwork it here. So what does it look like in heaven before it is manifested on the earth? That's what I want to know. Otherwise I'm in danger of doing things out of my own desires and imagination rather than out of a reflecting God's heart creatively, which is very different potentially. So yes, I do believe that the things Jesus did, we can do, but the way he did it, you know, which wasn't showing off, and it wasn't doing it because he could. It was doing it because it was an outworking of the Father's heart in that situation. So we need intimacy and relationship to outwork the Father's heart. Now, we don't know what Patrick's relationship with God was like. I'm sure if he did what he did, there was a dimension that he had that was very much connected to creation, differently than most churches and things would operate today, you know. So yeah, I think we should be encouraged, not to just sit back and do nothing, but to engage the Father, seek the Father's heart, and see how we can outwork the Father's heart, which may be in a very public way, but it also may be in a very private way. Most things are done with no one seeing them. And I think a lot of God's government and increase is internal and outworks in how we live our lives, not just in what we would perceive as, you know, manifested miracles and things which, you know, would draw attention to ourselves. And I think we should ask ourselves, do we want the attention, and would we be able to handle the attention? And would we be corrupted by the attention? And it's something to consider. You know, I wouldn't want to be doing those things on a world stage, personally. I have enough attention as it is. I don't want any more, you know, to be honest. I don't seek that, other than if God actually asked me to do something that required me to do it, then I would do it. But I would be very careful in not allowing that to create any sense of my own identity or worth or value because of what I was doing. I would be able to do things because of who I am. That doesn't define me. It doesn't define me if I did it, and it doesn't define me if I don't do it. You know, and that I would think is important, because a lot of people who have done things, I guess, that would somewhat reflect Jesus' ministry have ended up in big trouble because their level of maturity was not in proportion to the level of authority or power they were using. Hence, you have a lot of ministries which have collapsed and fallen because of people not really operating out of that sense of relationship with God. Yeah. So, yeah, Bob Jones once said, you know, it'll be the gold, the girls, or the glory that'll get you. Be careful. You know, and there is a sense of that, you know, be careful, because fame brings with it all sorts of traps as well as all sorts of blessings. You know, would I want to be famous? Not really, no. I'm quite happy living in obscurity here when no one can see me, and enjoying life and living it, you know, and I don't feel any need to do anything else other than that, which is why, you know, I don't do any real promotion. You know, the guys do the videos and all the stuff. You know, I don't do anything other than give them some source material. You know, I don't think in a promotional way. It's like when I went to the conference with Justin, Justin said, do you want any books to sell? And I'm like, oh, never even thought about that. Because I didn't genuinely never give it a thought, because that's not what I do. You know, it's just, I'm not bothered about that sort of thing. So, you know, I'm not really bothered about image or that type of the way I dress or whatever. It's just not interesting to me at all. Um, Therefore, for me, I'm very happy as it is, you know. So, but I think we all have to be open to whatever God calls us to and be ready if he does. You know, it's like if we were suddenly thrusted onto a world stage, how would we react? Would it be, you know, positive, struggle, you know, potentially a lot of ways in which we could easily be twisted by what those things are? You know, it's like God prepared me for negativity in that he dealt with those things in my heart. I don't really care if anyone says nasty things or says good things. It doesn't really affect me in a negative way or positive way, particularly because I know who I am in God. If you're in a public with a public persona, there's dangers in protecting reputation and all of that sort of stuff. It's like I don't have a reputation, so I'm just not that bothered by anything like that. But some people do, and therefore it's important that they maintain a right heart. They don't believe all the things that are written about them, good or bad, that they go how God sees them and how God gives them their value and worth and esteem. Because it doesn't come from what they do. It comes from who we are. You know, I feel good about myself because God feels good about me, not because I'm doing all these amazing things. You know, that doesn't really matter to me at all. I could give it all up tomorrow if God said, stop it, you know, because my value and my identity is not coming from what I do in any of those things. God has brought me to a place to know who I am. And for all of us, it's important to know who we really are, you know, and if we should be given opportunities on a world stage, then it shouldn't change us in the slightest. If we know who we are, then in those positions shouldn't change us. We shouldn't be different in public than in private. We should be, you know, the same all the way through, you know, not one in one place or another, you know, genuine. I guess we should be genuine in who we are, have integrity. And that comes out of our relationship with God. Yes, I wouldn't want to be a saint with a day named after me. You know, it has no attraction whatsoever, really.
St. Michael's Day,
Yeah,
Mike.
well, yeah. The question is though, you only get one after you die generally.
Oh, that's right.
As
You're immortal. You are
as I'm not
immortal. So
intending to die, then I don't
that's
really want
right.
one named after me while I'm alive, do I? So yeah. So yeah. But I do think we should really be open to be able to do anything that God asks us to do, no matter what it is, you know. And I know how to do a lot of things. Doesn't mean I do them, but if I did need to do them, I could.
Well, you're the one who had the Joshua generation song, Sons Arise, right? And
Yeah.
so in the arising is the revealing. And so at some, there's a balance between not pressing into the increase of his government and shalom, right? And not doing anything. So it's always that balance, right? Do I want to step out and do things that might cause persecution or might be, or it's that balance,
Yeah.
right? To align with
Yeah.
Father's heart. Is this the thing to do or not?
Yeah. I mean, for me, persecution, um, if you are not in terms of your identity, if it's not coming from what you do, then being
Right.
persecuted doesn't affect you in the slightest. Although, yeah, it might, I'm not saying it's pleasant or, you know, but you're going to forgive people. You're not going to hold it against anyone. You're not going to live in any sense of bitterness or resentment or unforgiveness. So if people do nasty things, then it's gone because you've released it. You're not going to live in it, um, in that sense. But I wouldn't do something because I feared persecution, or not do something because I feared persecution. It's like there have been a number of times in my life that God has shown me some things, and the implication was, oh, this is going to cause trouble if you go down this path. But God showed me the path and pointed me to the path, so I was going to go down it. So I was prepared for trouble. Well, what trouble? Well, people not liking what you do or say, or disagreeing with you. Well, they're entitled to. That's okay. Doesn't affect me or how I feel about myself if people disagree with me. That's up to them. And some people do get quite nasty about it at times, whatever, but it doesn't affect me. you know I bless people, choose to forgive them, bless them, and carry on. So it wouldn't stop me, but there have been occasions where I've thought about it. And particularly if you come out on a public thing like writing a book, the sort of eschatology, the restoration of all things book, it's like I did think, do I really want to write that? Potentially, I know a lot of my friends actually have beliefs which I am sort of challenging within the book. Do I really want to do that? No. But did God give me a choice? No. Really, it was like, you know, and he reminded me a number of times that I needed to get on and write that book, and eventually I did, and in reality, people can not read it. I don't want people to read it who it's going to offend or upset. So from that perspective, but there are people who have read it, who have been challenged by some of what it says in there, and it's caused them to reflect on the path they're on, particularly down certain routes, which is challenged in the book, in a theological perspective, which I think are deceptive routes and deceptive pathways, and I wouldn't want people going down it, which is why I believe God wanted me to write the book. I didn't write the book to cause trouble or confrontation and conflict or to upset people. But I did write the book because I believe God wants a generation to know the truth about certain theological positions that a lot of people hold, which I don't believe are true, and which I think have a very negative effect on the kingdom. So I wrote that expecting, in a sense, some people are not going to like this, but I also legislated that I don't want people to see it if they're not going to like it. So hopefully those people haven't read it, because I don't want to offend people, but I also wanted to bring things into the light that people have a choice to see there may be another way of looking at this, that perhaps you might have a look, but it's okay. And I feel if we know who we are in God and we are at rest in that, then no matter what the storms are of life around us, we do not have to be negatively impacted by them. I can be at rest in the midst of a storm. I don't have to be tossed around by every wind of change and direction and doctrine and everything else. I can be secure on a solid foundation, which I believe I have in him. It's not independent of him that I have it. It's in relationship with him that I have it. So I very much, enjoy the simplicity of resting in my relationship in him. And, I don't really need to think about image or public persona or anything like that, because I just don't. It's not in my nature. I just don't think about stuff like that at all.
So that's an interesting
Yeah.
way of looking at things. I was thinking of something. So we don't really get to choose our own battles, because God's gonna uh, He's gonna show us what to do anyway. I mean,
Well, yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to fight against anybody.
right, right.
And I wouldn't argue with people. I would just be, that's fine. If you want to believe something different, then believe something different. You know, you're not going to affect me if you believe something different. You know, I'm not impacted by anyone else's beliefs, you know, but I would obviously want people to know the truth and to discern that truth in Jesus and to discover that reality in him, you know, which is why giving people an opportunity to see there is more, that we can go beyond where we are right now into more, because, you know, the testimony that each of us has of more will inspire somebody else to keep going and not give up and to go beyond where they are presently, which is my desire, is that people would find and fulfill their destiny. They'll never do that without knowing who they are, you know, and I want to help people discover who they are, you know,
That's
that's
powerful. It's it was through Freedom Arc that my wife and I really began to seek God and really to learn and to understand our identity.
mm,
Now we don't get upset when people don't believe the way we believe or even disagree with us. Actually, it's we understand the process, and that process is a continual process, I guess, throughout our lives. But it's so true, Mike. I mean, it's all about our identity and relationship with God. Even when people don't understand us, it's okay.
yeah,
It's okay
absolutely.
because we can't change them and force them.
No,
We just have to just love them and love ourselves.
yeah, absolutely. We live in rest and in a sense of peace, and to be honest, that's the key, you know. And I'm not responsible for somebody else, they are, but I'm responsible for me in my relationship with somebody else, and I don't want to do anything in that relationship which would obviously be off-putting or present God in a negative way, you know. But that doesn't mean that people wouldn't be upset with me or accuse me of various things, because I'm not perfect, you know. But I would not ever intend to do anything that would bring any dishonor to God, you know, because I want God to be honored. And, you know, that means living my life in a relationship with him, hopefully to bring honor to him in that way. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.